I used to think the worst sound in the world was the mill whistle at Bainbridge Timber. That shrill blast at 5 a.m. meant another 12-hour shift of sweat, sawdust, and a boss who'd never worked a real day in his life. But now, the worst sound I know is silence, cold, suffocating silence inside a 5 by 10 storage unit in Springvale, Ohio, where I lay listening to the clatter of rats in the walls and the hum of a fluorescent light that flickered like it might give up before I did. I'm Jack Mercer, and 6 months ago, my life looked nothing like this. 6 months ago, I had a home, a wife, 2 kids who still called me dad, and a steady supervisor job. Today, I'm the man who found $50,000 in cash and a dead man's letter that shattered everything I thought I knew about my father, my marriage, and my own past. If you're reading this, follow every part of this story, because the truth didn't just save my life. It burned my old one to the ground. Stay through each part, share it with someone who needs hope, and comment if you've ever had life flip on you overnight. The night I found the briefcase, I was heating a can of beans on a camping stove balanced on 2 milk crates. The security guard knew I was living there, but he pretended not to. That's how Springvale is, people will watch you fall apart, but they won't say a word until you're already on the ground. I lost my job at Bainbridge Timber, lost the house on Redwood Circle, lost my kids to lies, lost my pride to a woman who once claimed she'd love me until the end. Alyssa and I were high school sweethearts, at least that's the story we told. She was the girl with the copper red hair and a smile she used like a weapon. I didn't know its sharpness until it was too late. I never really believed I'd lose her to Vance Bainbridge, the owner of the mill. His father built the company from nothing. Vance inherited it just long enough to ruin every good thing about it, especially me. He was the kind of man who walked like he owned your air and talked like he'd invented money. When he started showing up around Alyssa a little too often at company picnics or dropping comments about how pretty she still looks after kids, I should have recognized the signs. I'd seen him do it to other men, invade their homes with charm, then destroy them with lies. But I was busy working. I thought I was building something real with Alyssa and our kids, Ben and Emma. I thought 20 years of marriage meant something. Foolish. That's what I was. The day everything cracked open started with a flu I didn't have. My foreman told me I looked like death and sent me home early. I drove down Mapleview Road thinking I'd lay down for an hour. Instead, I pulled into my driveway and saw Vance's black Audi sitting bold as sin in front of my house. My first thought wasn't suspicion, it was stupidity. I told myself maybe something happened at the mill, maybe this was unexpected business. But when I walked inside and heard laughter coming from upstairs, her laugh, the soft one that used to be mine, I knew. People say you black out when you're angry. I didn't. I remember every step up that staircase, every photo of my kids along the wall, every sound coming from my own bedroom as Alyssa giggled and Vance whispered something smug about Paris. I found Vance half-dressed, tightening his belt like he was in his own damn house. Alyssa just sat brushing her hair like she'd been waiting for me to see it. How long? I asked. My voice didn't shake. Hers did. Does it matter, Jack? She answered. You've been asleep at the wheel for years. Vance sees me. You never did. Vance didn't even have the decency to look ashamed. He patted my shoulder on the way out like I was an intern caught stealing pens. We'll discuss your position tomorrow, he said. Tomorrow never came. The next morning, they fired me, budget cuts, Vance said with a smirk. 2 days later, divorce papers arrived. Alyssa wanted the house, full custody, alimony, child support, and half of everything left of my savings. Somehow she could afford the best attorney in the county, a man known for ripping fathers to pieces. The judge didn't care about truth. Not when the Bainbridge family paid for his re-election campaign. Alyssa painted me as unstable, violent, neglectful, a failure. She even used the hole I'd punched in the garage wall after catching her with Vance as evidence I was dangerous. I lost the house. Lost my kids. Lost everything except the clothes on my back and a 20-year-old truck that barely ran. Which is how a man like me ended up in a storage unit with nothing left but silence and shame. I'd been picking through the boxes Alyssa stuffed into the unit, old clothes, kids' drawings, my father's military medals, when I saw a leather briefcase wedged behind a crate. The luggage tag was faded, but I recognized the handwriting immediately, Uncle Otis. Vietnam vet. Lived alone in the Montana wilderness. Showed up at Thanksgiving once a year and always handed me a folded dollar bill with the same warning, watch the men with clean hands, they rarely do their own dirty work. Otis died 8 months before the divorce. I didn't know why he'd left me anything. But I cracked open that briefcase anyway. The lock broke with a pop. Inside were neatly wrapped stacks of $100 bills. $50,000. And a handwritten letter from Otis addressed to me. A letter that began with these words. Jack, if you're reading this, it means everything has been taken from you. Good. Now you can finally see the truth about your father. I read that line 6 times before I could breathe again. Tomorrow, I would leave Ohio forever. I didn't know yet that the $50,000 was the smallest part of what Otis left me. Or that the truth waiting in Montana would burn the entire Bainbridge family to the ground. The morning after I found the briefcase, I woke up before the sun, my breath fogging in the cold air of the storage unit. I hadn't slept much. Otis's letter lay open beside me on the cot, the words burned into my brain. My father didn't die in an accident. Someone murdered him. Someone connected to the Bainbridge family. The same family now sleeping with my wife and holding my children hostage through lies and money. Otis had written like he'd been waiting his whole life for me to reach this point. Like he knew rock bottom was the only place I'd finally believe him. I folded the letter, tucked the stacks of cash into a duffel bag, and took one last look around the concrete cell that had become my home. A month ago, I would have given anything just to escape the humiliation of living like that. Now, I realized it was a cocoon. Every piece of my old life had to die before I was strong enough to face the truth Otis had left behind. Before leaving, I slid a sticky note onto the inside wall of the unit. Thanks, Carl. The night guard never turned me in, never asked questions. Sometimes the angels in life wear cheap uniforms and drink stale coffee. I bought a used Ford F-150 from a guy off Route 7, paying cash so quick his eyes nearly popped out. The truck had dents, rust around the wheel wells, and a radio that only worked if you smacked it, but it ran. That was all I needed. I loaded it with the duffel, a tent, canned food, and whatever tools Otis might have expected me to need. I didn't know what was waiting in Montana, but Otis was a man who never believed in simple dangers. Before driving out of Springvale, I made one last stop, Mapleview Street. My house. Or what used to be my house. Alyssa had hung new curtains, changed the landscaping, repainted the shutters like she was erasing every trace of me. Ben's bike was in the driveway. Emma's soccer bag leaned against the porch. They were living a life that moved on without me, not knowing the truth, not knowing their mother was a stranger in a familiar face. I didn't step out. Didn't knock. Didn't want them to see me as the broken man Alyssa painted me to be in court. Instead, I whispered a promise to the windshield, "You'll know everything soon. Both of you." Then I drove west. 3 days and 1,600 miles later, the landscape transformed from flat highways to jagged mountains. Montana felt like a different planet, endless pines, valleys full of shadow, skies so wide they made you feel small enough to start over. The coordinates Otis gave led me deep into Flathead County, where cell service died and even the GPS stuttered before giving up entirely. Timberwolf Road was nothing more than a dirt path carved between walls of trees. A rusted red gate sagged across it, held by a lock matching the second key on Otis's ring. I stepped out, heart pounding, and unlocked it. Beyond the gate, the world swallowed the truck whole. No houses. No roads. No signs of life except deer tracks and the distant echo of water hitting rocks. I drove until the road dissolved into raw earth, then parked and continued on foot, following Otis's instructions. Walk north for 1 mile until you find the boulder shaped like a bear's head. It was real. Massive. Haunting. From the right angle, it looked ready to stand up and walk. Behind it, hidden by brush so thick it felt intentional, was a trail barely wide enough for a single person. I pushed through branches until a cabin appeared, rising out of the forest like a secret that refused to stay buried. I expected a shack. Something built from scraps. But this was fortified. Reinforced steel door. Solar panels. Satellite dish. A generator humming behind a shed. Otis hadn't built a hideout. He'd built a fortress. My hand shook a little as I used the third key. The lock clicked, and the door swung open with a low creak. Inside, the air smelled like cedar and dust. A single room filled with the kind of truth that doesn't whisper, it screams. One entire wall was covered in pinned photographs, documents, maps, timelines. Another wall stacked with filing cabinets labeled with dates and names. A desk held 3 monitors connected to a hard drive blinking with faint blue light. Surveillance equipment lined the shelves. This wasn't a hermit's retreat. It was an investigation center. My father's face stared at me from multiple photographs. My father, Daniel Mercer, smiling beside the original Bainbridge founder in some. Standing at the mill in others. Holding documents labeled mineral rights transfer. My father didn't just work at Bainbridge Timber. He co-owned something that mattered. Something valuable. Something lethal. I looked closer. Mineral rights. Gas fields. Millions of dollars in unclaimed revenue. Notes written in Otis's shorthand explained everything. Bainbridge Sr. spent decades trying to push my father into selling his share. My father refused. On the last page of one folder, Otis had written, he threatened them. They silenced him. The ground tilted beneath me as if the cabin itself shifted. My father hadn't died in a loader malfunction accident like the newspaper claimed. Otis had tracked maintenance reports, interviews, police logs, death certificates, witness statements. Every piece of the puzzle laid out like a map pointing to the truth. Bainbridge Sr. had orchestrated the whole thing. But that wasn't the only betrayal staring at me. In a folder marked A.M. Alyssa Mercer, I found photographs, bank statements, even school records showing she'd been connected to the Bainbridge family long before she fell in love with me in high school. Payments made to her mother. A second cell phone I never knew she had. Surveillance footage of her with Vance years before I ever suspected anything. One recording made my skin crawl. Alyssa's voice saying, "I've played the role for long enough. When do we end this?" Vance replying, "When he's broken enough not to fight for custody. Once he snaps, the mineral rights fall to you." I sank into Otis's old armchair. My hands shook so badly the papers slipped from my fingers. My wife had been planted in my life. Not by fate, but by the same family that murdered my father. I stared at the wall of evidence until my eyes burned. My marriage was a lie. My life had been manipulated like a marionette pulled by invisible strings. And the man who took everything from me, my job, my home, my dignity, was the son of the man who killed my father. I sat there for hours, barely moving, barely breathing, the forest wind rattling the cabin walls as if urging me to stand up and fight. Otis was gone. My father was gone. But I was still here. I closed my eyes and whispered, "I'll finish what you started." And for the first time in months, I felt like the real Jack Mercer hadn't died in that storage unit after all. I don't remember falling asleep in that cabin, but I woke with my head resting on Otis's desk, the glow of dawn slipping through the reinforced windows. For a moment, I forgot where I was. Then I saw my father's photo on the evidence wall, the same smile I used to see when he came home from late shifts, and every truth from last night came rushing back like a punch to the ribs. I stood slowly, my back stiff from hours spent hunched over file folders. Outside, the Montana wilderness looked untouched by time. Pines swayed with the kind of calm that made you think nothing evil could ever happen in a place like this. Yet Otis had spent 40 years gathering proof that evil had built an empire in Ohio, and that evil had worn the Bainbridge name. I made coffee on the old propane stove in the corner and took my mug to the wall of documents. I forced myself to go through every photograph, every timestamp, every sheet of surveillance notes. If Otis had spent half his life unraveling this, then I owed him the same dedication. The truth came at me in layers. My father, Daniel Mercer, inherited mineral rights from his own father, rights covering land Bainbridge Timber sat on. Otis's notes made it clear, Bainbridge Sr. needed those rights. Without them, the gas fields beneath Springvale couldn't legally be exploited. My dad refused every offer. Otis had written in the margins, Danny wanted to leave something lasting for his boys. Then came the so-called accident. A loader crushed him at the mill, supposedly due to a mechanical failure. But Otis had traced the maintenance records. The loader had been serviced the day before. Photos of the machine showed the hydraulic lines cut clean, not frayed, not ruptured. Cut. Deliberate. The mechanic on duty went missing 2 weeks after the accident. Reported as moved out of state. Otis had tracked him down, dead in Wyoming under an assumed name with no next of kin. I felt sick reading it. Not just because my father had been murdered, but because someone had walked around for decades acting like they owned the whole town, because they did, and no one ever questioned it. People in Springvale shook Bainbridge hands and took Bainbridge money and never wondered why the mill grew richer after the so-called partnership dissolved. But the part that truly cracked something inside me came from the folder marked Alyssa. I forced myself to read it all. Phone logs showing secret calls between her and Vance going back years. A diary entry from Otis that said, caught them together behind the lodge at 20 degrees. She's been groomed. Meetings at a motel when I thought Alyssa was visiting her mother. Payments disguised as consulting fees from a Bainbridge subsidiary deposited into an account in her maiden name, payments that began when she was 17. One audio file in particular made my chest feel hollow. Alyssa's voice, he trusts too easily. It's pathetic. Vance, that's why he was chosen. We needed someone soft. Someone moldable. Alyssa, he'll crumble soon. He's already exhausted. He'll break. Vance, good. Broken men don't ask questions. I slammed my hand against the desk so hard a mug fell and shattered across the floor. My heartbeat thundered in my ears. Everything I'd believed about my marriage, every smile, every touch, every memory, it all twisted into something rotten. Alyssa hadn't just betrayed me. She'd been paid to destroy me. And she used my own children as leverage to do it. It took everything in me not to punch a hole straight through Otis's cabin wall. I steadied myself with a long breath. Then another. Rage was useless without purpose. And Otis hadn't built all this for me to fall apart. He built it so I could finish what my father couldn't. After hours of sorting, scanning, and photographing documents with the phone I'd brought, I found a small wooden box in Otis's safe. Inside was a silver flash drive labeled Open Last. I plugged it into one of the monitors. A video file loaded. Otis sat in front of the camera, older than I'd ever seen him, pale and frail but still burning with that sharp look in his eyes. He cleared his throat before speaking. "Jack, if you're watching this, I'm gone, and you're standing in the cabin I built with the last good years of my life. I know you're hurting. I know you're angry. You deserve to be. They took your father from you. They took your family from you. They took every damn thing they could get their hands on." He leaned forward. "But they didn't get all of it. And they never will. I made sure of that." The screen flickered slightly. "You have the mineral rights now. Legally. I've protected every document, every transfer, every lease. The fortune they wanted is yours. But the money isn't what matters." His voice softened. "What matters is truth. Justice. Your father wasn't a liar, and he wasn't weak. He died protecting his family's legacy. Now it's your turn to decide whether the Bainbridges keep burying this town, or whether you bury them with the truth." I sat frozen for nearly a full minute after the video ended. My hands were cold. My chest tight. Otis hadn't just left evidence. He'd left purpose. Direction. A mission he expected me to carry forward. But I didn't move forward yet. I needed one more piece, something Otis had hinted at in his letter. Something about the future, not just the past. In the final cabinet drawer, I found it, another letter, addressed to me and dated 2 weeks before Otis died. "Jack, do not confront anyone alone. Do not confront the Bainbridges in Springvale. They hold the courts, the cops, and half the damn town in their pockets. Go to the federal level. FBI field office in Pittsburgh. Agent Norris. She owes me a favor. Bring everything. And for God's sake, don't let Alyssa know you're alive until you're ready." I exhaled slowly. My hands trembled, not from fear, but from clarity. There was a way forward now. I spent 2 more days in the cabin scanning every document and backing up every recording. I burned my father's face into my memory again and again, promising him silently that I would not fail the way he was forced to. On the 3rd morning, I locked the cabin again, hid the key back under the Bearhead boulder, and climbed into the F-150. My old life was gone. My new life, my father's unfinished fight, waited down the mountain. I drove east. Toward justice. Toward the truth. Toward the Bainbridges. And toward the reckoning they never saw coming. The drive back to Ohio felt different than the drive out. When I'd first left Springvale, I was running from humiliation, from loss, from a life that had fallen apart faster than I could catch it. But now I wasn't running from anything. I was driving toward something. Toward justice. Toward truth. Toward the end of a 40-year lie. The F-150 hummed beneath me like it understood the mission. Otis's flash drive sat in the passenger seat, along with stacks of documents and a binder I'd put together from everything in the cabin. My father's handwriting, Otis's obsessive notes, photos, receipts, paper that looked ordinary but carried the weight of murder, corruption, and betrayal deep enough to drown the Bainbridge family. 3 days after leaving Montana, I reached the outskirts of Pittsburgh. The FBI building rose from the skyline like a warning sign. I parked across the street, suddenly aware of how my clothes still smelled faintly of campfire smoke and pine. I carried the binder inside anyway. The receptionist didn't blink when she asked my name, but something in her eyes changed when I mentioned Agent Patricia Norris. She made a call, nodded once, and told me to wait. Agent Norris walked out 5 minutes later, a woman in her late 40s with sharp eyes, a tighter jaw, and a presence that told you she didn't tolerate nonsense. She introduced herself with a handshake firm enough to steady my nerves. "You're Otis Mercer's nephew," she said. Not a question. A statement. "Yes. He told me you might show up one day." She gestured to a private room. "Let's see what he left you." It took 6 hours. 6 hours of spreading documents across the table, playing audio files, watching Norris and 2 other agents exchange looks of disbelief and then anger. They asked questions. I answered everything. When they played the recording of Alyssa and Vance discussing how to break me, even the stone-faced junior agent looked shaken. By the end, Agent Norris sat back, exhaled slowly, and tapped her pen on the table. "Jack," she said, "you have no idea how big this is." "Yes," I said quietly. "I do." She stood and motioned to the door. "Go home. We'll take it from here. And Jack, do not contact Alyssa. Do not go near Vance. Do not hint that you know anything. If they sense you're a threat, they won't wait for legal process. They'll bury you the way they buried your father." I nodded. I wasn't going to give the Bainbridges the chance. What happened next unfolded faster than I expected. For 4 months, the FBI moved quietly behind the scenes. Subpoenas. Forensic audits. Hidden surveillance. Interviews with old mill workers Otis had flagged as potential witnesses. An undercover agent even got hired temporarily at Bainbridge Timber to monitor activity on the inside. Then, on a cold Tuesday morning in November, the entire house of cards collapsed. It started with a news alert that lit up my burner phone. Bainbridge Timber CEO arrested on charges of fraud, bribery, tax evasion, environmental violations. Then another alert. 3 city council members implicated. Judge Kenneth Hale removed from bench pending federal investigation. Then more. The Springvale police chief. 2 Bainbridge accountants. A land surveyor who fabricated safety reports back in the 1980s. It was like watching dominoes fall in slow motion, each one exposing another layer of corruption I didn't know existed. The biggest domino, though, was Vance Bainbridge himself. The FBI arrested him at the Springvale Country Club, his playground, the place where he bragged, schemed, and bought half the town's silence. They dragged him out in front of the same men who used to admire him. He tried to keep his dignity, but he looked like a man who just realized his father's sins weren't buried as deep as he thought. And Alyssa? She was arrested at Emma's school pickup line. A place where she expected routine and normalcy. Instead, flashing lights and handcuffs. She called me from county jail that night. "Jack, please help me. You don't understand what they're saying I did." I almost hung up. But part of me needed to hear it. "You destroyed me," I said quietly. "You burned our family to the ground." "No," Vance told me, Vance said. "I heard the recordings, Alyssa." Silence. Then sobbing. She wasn't crying because she was sorry. She was crying because the safety net she thought she had, Vance, Bainbridge money, her fabricated innocence, had been ripped out from under her. "They said I'll lose the kids," she whispered. "Jack. I never meant. You never meant to get caught," I finished. "That's different." I ended the call. I didn't answer when she tried calling again. I wasn't the same man who begged her to stay, who believed her lies, who thought love guaranteed loyalty. That man died in a storage unit. The man standing in his place knew truth mattered more than any shattered marriage. The 4-month trial that followed was brutal. Reporters swarmed Springvale. The courtroom overflowed every day. Vance's attorneys tried everything: intimidation, discrediting witnesses, even claiming Otis forged evidence. But the FBI's case was overwhelming. Otis had been too thorough. Too stubborn. Too brilliant. In the end, the jury convicted Vance on 21 federal charges. 15 years in a federal prison, no possibility of early release. Alyssa pled guilty to conspiracy and falsifying affidavits. She received 5 years but would likely serve 2. I didn't go to the sentencing. I didn't need to. Justice didn't need an audience. My focus was on the 2 people who had mattered from the beginning, Ben and Emma. They had been staying with Alyssa's sister during the trial, away from the chaos. When I finally got legal clearance to see them, I stood in the doorway of my new 2-bedroom house just outside Springvale, hands shaking harder than they did when I found the briefcase. Ben opened the door. Taller than I remembered. Eyes older. He looked at me for a long time before saying a single word. "Dad?" That word cracked something inside me. Emma ran from the kitchen and threw her arms around me, crying into my shirt. "I'm sorry, Daddy," she whispered. "Mom said things that weren't true." I held them both and told them the only truth that mattered. You were never the problem. You never will be. Healing took time. Therapy. Honest conversations. Nights spent cooking dinner together, trying to rebuild something real after so many lies. Ben eventually asked the question I knew he was holding inside. Were we part of the plan? No, I said immediately. You and Emma were the only real things in that whole mess. He nodded and wiped his eyes. That was the first night we laughed again. Just a little. But it was real. I used the mineral rights money Otis left me, clean, legally protected, to rebuild my life. Bought a plot of land outside town. Opened Mercer Lumber and Supply, a company run with integrity instead of greed. I hired men Bainbridge had mistreated for years. Paid fair wages. Built something worthy of my father and uncle. And I kept the storage unit. Unit #B17. Still paid $89 a month. Still visited every now and then. Not because I needed it. But because it reminded me that survival doesn't always look glamorous. Sometimes survival looks like a concrete box, a cold meal, and a man who refuses to give up. Sometimes survival is the first step toward justice. And sometimes justice waits 40 years before showing up, but when it does, it arrives like a storm no empire can outrun. My name is Jack Mercer. I was nobody. But sometimes nobody is exactly who brings down an empire built on lies. If you connected with this story, if it reminded you that truth outlives every lie, then please like this video, share it with someone who needs strength, and comment below with the battles you've fought. And don't forget to subscribe for more real stories of resilience. Share this story with someone who thinks they're too broken to stand up again. Sometimes rock bottom is the place God builds a foundation.